Story 1. Instead of obvious preparing, I joined a local hiking group to learn the terrain and made friends with people who have useful skills. My new friend Sarah is a nurse, John is ex-military, and Mike is an expert gardener. Building a community might be more valuable than stockpiling supplies when everything falls apart. Story 2. Cardio. Something that is truly overlooked is how physically demanding fighting is, even just running around. You can have all the guns, bullets, and food stockpiled, and then get overwhelmed because you cannot run for more than 10 seconds. Go all out and carry a 35-pound pack on your back while you do it for extra realism. Story 3. My friend group already started the process of apocalypse prepping years ago where we each figured out our roles. We have carpenters, cooks, construction and electricity experts, farmer and livestock experts, gunsmiths, and mechanical engineers. We can mill our own wood powered by solar, stockpile for heating, build shelter, grow and preserve our own food, and be able to defend ourselves or help and protect others willing to contribute. For the record, we are all very leftist, not a conservative in the bunch. We all chipped in on some very good land in a rural area with plenty of natural resources. We spend summers working our parcels and helping each other out. It's the commune vibe without it being a cult. Also, a good party spot. Story 4. This is how you know people really don't believe the United States is going to violently fall apart. If people did actually believe this, stores would be sold out, and there would be mass migration out of the country on a scale never before seen. Story 5. I think many people can relate to this. Honestly, I'm not really preparing. The biggest difference between me and my family is that I recognize stores might not always be fully stocked, so I tend to keep a little extra on hand. Meanwhile, my dad waits until things like milk or juice run out before making a store run. Beyond that, I'm not doing much. I could learn skills to be more self-sufficient, but I haven't. I'm just hoping that if a collapse happens, it won't be too severe or too sudden. Story 6. I have studied German society before and after the Nazi regime. Just before the collapse of their government at the hands of Adolf Hitler, a loaf of bread was 2 marks. Afterward, it was 100 million marks for the same loaf. Children died in the streets of starvation. Additionally, during the Great Depression, neighbors came together to build and grow victory gardens to sustain their families. I would say we all need to learn gardening and food storage. Story 7. I'd leave. We didn't alienate all our neighbors and closest allies, so I can cross a few borders with nothing more than identification and can stay there for as long as I want. Story 8. I live out in the country and work on a ranch. There are approximately 2 homes for every 1 mile of road. Everyone around me has skills to bring to the table, so luckily, we are probably already prepared. I really feel for city dwellers nowadays. I think it is unfortunate people have developed into what they are now. Certainly wishing the best for everyone out there today. Story 9. I live in a remote area. We have more than enough farms, rivers, and hunting space, so no one in the community would starve. I have enough ammunition to protect my and my neighbors' lands. Generally, I imagine I'd be okay. In reality, I'd probably not last long, so instead, I would fly to the Philippines and convert all of my cash to pesos. I certainly have more than enough to live comfortably for the next 30 or so years there. Story 10. Yesterday, I sat down and experienced severe diarrhea for about 10 minutes. By the time I was done, I felt awful. I stood up, flushed, and discovered that my toilet wouldn't flush. Before dealing with the toilet, I decided to wash my hands. After washing my hands, I thought, might as well brush my teeth. As I'm brushing my teeth and tongue, I accidentally triggered my gag reflex. This happens occasionally and isn't usually a big deal, but something unexpected occurred this time. I suddenly filled my mouth with vomit, and more was coming. I rushed to the toilet and started to lift the lid, but I couldn't hold back any longer. My vomit hit the lid at its halfway point, creating a fountain effect, like when water from a faucet hits an upside-down spoon. It splattered on me, the walls, the back of the toilet, and finally into the toilet. Once the lid was lifted, my violent vomiting splashed the diarrhea-laden water all over me. When I finished, I was staring down at the messy scene. This is what I'll be doing. Story 11. I kind of hate to say this, but the people who have been preparing for years would be the most ready. They've seen this coming and have set up for it. In Washington state, I lived near people who built their home underground with full electric solar systems and such. I dated a girl when I was 18, and her dad was always filling used soda bottles with filtered water, beans, and rice, storing them under his home. Things like that. However, anyone who knows about these preparations in desperate situations will come to them for help when things go wrong. I live in Bakersfield, California. It will be chaos if society collapses here. I worry about that. Story 12. Ammunition for my guns. As much non-perishable food as I can get. A bigger generator and lots of fuel for it. I live on 20 acres in the country, so I can control my immediate environment better than if I lived in town. Talk to all of my immediate neighbors to make a plan so we can coordinate our actions should actions be necessary. As a group, set up control to access the subdivision. Fuel up all of the vehicles. Story 13. Honestly, I would look at moving elsewhere. I know I would want to be one to stand and fight, but I also know in my core that I likely do not have that in me. I would find a safe place to shelter while funneling whatever support I could back to those who were fighting. Story 14. 3 to 6 months is too close if that's really the case. But the reality is if it was 3 to 6 months away from collapse, you would have already had a lot of market failures and daily changes that would inhibit you from being able to sufficiently prepare. Realistically, figure out what type of survival you want. Refugee, institutional loyalist, looter, scrapper, etc. There is a reason people leave areas after war and failure, but it isn't a guarantee even if you make it out. Realistically, you'd have more time than you'd expect. Many people have been worried and prepping for decades after discovering one event that they thought would come very quickly. Story 15. I wouldn't be pretending to be a revolutionary on Reddit. But that's how you know these people aren't serious. They farm karma, there are bots, and the moment hysteria arises. If it were really going that way, this would be the last place you talk about it or how you would do it. Story 16. I don't see a catalyst for a fall in 6 months unless it's bird flu. It takes a lot for comfortable people to revolt. I can see 2 to 3 years and irreversible long-term consequences, but with the current propaganda machine, I don't see a real turning point happening this year. Story 17. I would probably move to the mountains to live with my mom. She owns her house, and the town she is in is pretty self-contained and isolated. My wife and I could hunker down for a while and wait for all this to blow over. Story 18. If you really felt that way, you should sell your property and prepare to move. There is no amount of strategic planning that can prepare you for a government collapse. Outside of living in or moving to very rural areas to mitigate the initial impact, you are still likely to feel its effects. 3 to 6 months is not enough time to establish or stockpile a sustainable food, water, and energy source. Your very best bet for avoiding any disruption is to liquidate a number of your assets and find another country to live in, or move to a rural part of a country that borders another country. That way, you can maximize your options in terms of goods and supplies. Realistically, civil unrest and political violence are likely to follow a government collapse. Avoiding city centers and places with high populations should be your aim. Scarcity will also become an issue. If people get hungry enough, the first place they will target will be stores, and after stores, farms. The closer you are to a city center, homesteading or not, the higher the risk you will be affected. Story 19. I don't know, I'm just going to post this everywhere. Arm yourselves. We've reached the point where the only thing that will save us is civil war. It's time to actively fight against this regime and fight for our Constitution. It's not liberal versus conservative. It's America versus the oligarchy's successful coup. Are we still Americans anymore? What does that even mean now that we are ruled by a king? How much worse will it be when the king dies and Vance takes over? What will be left? They took your jobs. They took your freedoms. They took your sense of safety and security. Take up arms before they take away that right, too. We've been backed into a corner. No one is coming to save us, we have to save ourselves. Story 20. I've always been taught that in case of any real emergency, you should plan to stay where you are ideally. So having supplies for a week or two is important. And then you need a way to protect them. It rhymes with fun. We also have a tiny solar generator that can handle lights and things like that. So water, a way to treat undrinkable water, food, ideally a camping stove, and a gun should get you most of the way there. Story 21. I've had a bad feeling about the direction of the United States since COVID-19, so I've been slowly buying up necessities like medicines, bandages, and other first aid items. I've also gotten into hunting and learned how to field dress the animal and process it myself. I'm starting a garden in the coming weeks with family friends and building up a small community. Story 22. I personally won't be affected. They've already destroyed my entire life. The violence won't touch me. I'm not what they are angry with. I have nothing to tend to. It makes no difference if I just go sunbathe while the chaos unfolds. Story 23. I think about this a lot. I would probably leave if I were able to. Leaving is a lot harder than people think. But if I could not leave, I would plan with my neighbors. I live in a development of about 20 houses in a pretty rural town in Connecticut. Reasonable people. I know many have guns and all have technical know-how. I think we would meet, take a survey of weapons and ammunition, consider training people who do not have firearms experience, and plan for a perimeter guarding system. I guess that's all we could do. The problem is, if a mob shows up that has more people than you have and more or better weapons, you could be toast. Story 24. The best thing to do is to make sure you have a group of people to fall back on. You can't survive on your own if it's a true *T hits the fan scenario. You just can't. A small group of people willing to support each other and keep everyone fed and safe is much more agile than a single household. Story 25. There are many countries with citizens who have to live with this on a daily basis. Ukraine, for instance, South Sudan, Taiwan. There are many opportunities to learn how they manage to organize their lives during violently unstable times. Story 26. No preparation necessary for me. I'd go home to the cornfields and small town and move in with my family. You are not invading a small town without losing, and they are completely self-sustainable. Story 27. It all depends on a wide variety of factors. If you move to a rural farming community and quickly learn some useful skills, you will have food and a place to sleep. Story 28. I am already mostly prepared. I live in a rural area on 5 acres, have guns, and the ability to harvest game. I would love to have solar on the house to have some electricity, but I do not have that yet. Story 29. If we are talking about mass destruction, I would buy a book on what is safe to eat in the wild, learn how to make a camp, pack only essential items, and hide out in the mountains. Story 30. Guns, ammunition, clean water, and canned food. Also, books that teach you necessities because the internet may not be working, gardening, and how-to guides for anything you need. Story 31. Community. The key is building a community. All these preppers who think they will be safe are delusional. You will have about a week until people get violent. You will eventually run out of ammunition. If you do not have community, you will not survive. Identify the skills of the people in your community. That will be key. Story 32. Stock up on water and food. The most important part is being able to stay at home for a longer period of time, so you can stay away from turmoil happening outdoors and not rely on supermarkets being stocked. Then hope it's over in a few weeks. If it looks like a full-scale civil war is breaking out, just leave everything behind and get on the first airplane, or try to leave by car together with some supplies. Story 33. Honest answer. Become friends with your neighbors. Have a solid amount of cash on hand. Don't let your vehicles get below 3/4 of a tank, and have at least 20 gallons of gas on hand in 5-gallon tanks. Have at least 2 weeks' worth of food on hand. Water shouldn't be a major concern. If water mains go dry, things are bad. Those will be the very last utilities to go down. If the electrical grid goes down, you have a short amount of time where the water towers still have pressure, so you should fill every bathtub and jug you have. You do have a 50-gallon reserve in your hot water heater. Have 2 to 3 kerosene lamps on hand. Have at least some firearm for personal defense. You aren't a soldier, so don't focus on having an AR-15 rifle. A handgun or shotgun is plenty. If you are in the suburbs or further out, Direct violence shouldn't be a major concern in the short term. If you're in an urban area, you really need to have a get-out-of-town plan, as those areas can devolve faster than people realize. At the end of the day, we're just talking about good old-fashioned stuff hits the fan prepping. It's up to you to decide what the plausible threat is. You can prepare for simple unrest, or you can plan for a full grid collapse and nuclear war. Story 34. I am not suicidal or wishing to do anything self-inflicted. But each day I embrace my life ending right now more and more. So, while I may not willingly turn a gun on myself, I will not exactly move if someone fires in my direction. Right after laws were enacted after September 11th that restricted certain rights under the guise of national security, I decided right then to not have kids as I saw a few of my own rights restricted. That is the one positive I have here. I have no children that I will leave behind. Story 35. Apparently, I would go about life as usual because that's what I'm doing, and I'm pretty sure my country is 3 to 6 months away from collapse. I'm not sure what else to do.